April, 1975. In one of the wealthiest corners of London, Mayfair, 8 sharply dressed men walked into a branch of the Bank of America.
No guns drawn. No alarms triggered.
Just briefcases, suits, and ice-cold nerves. But when they left, they had walked away with over £8 million in cash, jewels, and priceless treasures. A fortune so vast, only a fraction was ever recovered. What started as a silent breach became one of Britain's biggest bank heists, forever altering how security, surveillance, and betrayal would be seen in the criminal world. This is the story of how one inside man opened the vault to fortune, how a criminal syndicate made British history, and how Scotland Yard scrambled to chase ghosts in tailored suits. Stay with us. What you're about to hear is a masterclass in deception, trust, and betrayal. This is the Mayfair Heist. Before we crack open the vault on this wild tale, tap that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next twist in this unbelievable real-life crime story. Stuart Buckley was just 26 years old when he entered prison on a minor charge, handling stolen goods. On paper, he was nothing more than a petty criminal. But behind his quiet demeanor was a mind sharper than most gave him credit for. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't feared. But he was observant. Fastidious. His prison cell was always spotless. His belongings were organized. His clothing folded with military precision. Fellow inmates thought he was odd, too clean, too careful, but nobody thought of him as a threat. That was their mistake. What Buckley lacked in education, he could barely read or write, he made up for in technical intuition. Phones, wires, radio systems. He could take apart and rebuild electronics with nothing more than a screwdriver and raw instinct. He'd never been trained.
No certificates. No apprenticeship.
Just an uncanny ability to bypass systems most people didn't understand. He wasn't violent. He didn't carry weapons. But he was smart enough to get close to places others only dreamed of robbing. Clothing was. And after serving just 9 months, Buckley walked free. Not with a plan to go straight, but with a much more dangerous idea forming quietly in his mind. He wasn't going back to prison for handling scraps. Next time, he wanted something bigger. Out of prison, Buckley did what many ex-cons attempt. He looked for work. Not out of reformation, but out of strategy. He found a job listing. A vacancy for an electrician. The employer. The Bank of America. Located on Davies Street in London's elite Mayfair district, this branch wasn't just another bank. It catered to foreign diplomats, high-net-worth individuals, and Far Eastern businessmen, people who needed to store wealth securely and discreetly. The Bank of America had 9 branches in London, but the Mayfair one? That was the crown jewel. Buckley applied.
Non-robbing.
Background check. No one called the police. No one questioned why a man with no formal training in electronics knew so much about rewiring phone systems. He got the job. Working as a casual technician on a cash-in-hand basis, Buckley quietly embedded himself inside the most secure vaults in the country. With every visit, he rewired phones, repaired alarm connections, and upgraded systems. And with each task completed, the bank staff trusted him a little more. What they didn't know was that he was memorizing layouts, entry points, blind spots, and routines. Even worse, they began giving him keys. As weeks turned to months, Buckley became more than just a technician. He was seen as dependable, quiet, efficient. He was granted full access to multiple Bank of America branches, Davies Street and Cannon Street included. Whenever a phone went down or a wire needed fixing, they called Buckley. Even on weekends. Even at night. And because he had keys, he let himself in. Security procedures at the time were laughable by modern standards. Keys were kept on hooks behind the receptionist's desk, sometimes just lying on a switchboard. The alarm system? Primitive. A gramophone-style audio alert that triggered a recorded message to police if a door was forced open. All Buckley had to do was lift the needle from the record, and the alarm would never play. The vault? Its doors were heavy and secure, but the human element? Soft. Weak. Predictable. Soon, Buckley realized something dangerous. He didn't need to crack the vault himself. He just needed to tell someone who could. It began, like many terrible ideas, over a drink. At a quiet pub in South London, Stuart Buckley sat nursing a pint when he spotted a familiar face, Frank Maple, an old associate from the criminal underworld. A seasoned operator. Not the kind of man you casually mention your job to, unless you want something. Maybe Buckley needed to feel important. Maybe he just wanted to impress. Or maybe, deep down, he was hoping someone like Maple would do exactly what he did, listen closely. Because when Buckley casually mentioned he was working at the Bank of America, installing wires, fixing alarms, holding keys, Maple's interest sharpened immediately. Buckley didn't need to say much more. Frank Maple understood the value of opportunity. And this wasn't just any opportunity, it was gold dust. Access to a major international bank in one of the richest neighborhoods in the country. A bank filled with cash, diamonds, and untold secrets buried in safety deposit boxes. Maple leaned in. His eyes lit up. The Bank of America, he said, has got a lot of money, and it's going to lose some. The deal was unspoken but understood. Buckley had the keys. Maple had the crew. And with that pint, a partnership was born, one that would soon become one of the most infamous in British history. Once Frank Maple made up his mind, things moved quickly. He wasn't just any career criminal, he was connected, organized, and dangerously calm under pressure. Maple knew that to pull off a heist of this scale, he'd need more than brute force. He needed specialists. Men who knew their roles, played them well and didn't talk. First on the list was Jimmy O'Loughlin, a quiet but streetwise neighbor from Kingston upon Thames. O'Loughlin didn't have a rap sheet that screamed danger, but Maple saw potential. He needed a reliable chief of staff, someone to coordinate logistics, arrange tools, secure transport, and manage the day-to-day operations of a gang. O'Loughlin was trusted. Careful. Just the kind of lieutenant Maple wanted beside him. Next came Leonard Minchington, better known in the criminal world as Johnny the Bosch. A safe-cracking expert with a long trail of convictions, Minchington was infamous in North London for his skill with steel. They called him the King of the Twirls for a reason. He could manipulate combination locks, vault dials, and any gate put in his path. If anyone could breach the fortress-like door of a bank vault, it was Johnny the Bosch. Then there was Peter Coulson, known in whispers as the Lucky Thief. Unlike the others, Coulson had no convictions. His record was clean. But that didn't mean he was innocent. He had been stealing since childhood and had made a quiet fortune from it. Living in a nice house, dressing well, and never once setting foot in a courtroom, Coulson was a valuable asset. With no police record, he could move without suspicion. He could enter, watch, and walk away unnoticed. These weren't random thugs. They were tacticians. Professionals. And now, with Buckley as their inside man, the real planning could begin. The early meetings took place quietly, with the smell of breakfast and cigarettes hanging in the air. Buckley would finish his shift at the Bank of America and meet Minchington and O'Loughlin at a cafe near the Davy Street branch. Over tea and toast, he'd share what he'd learned that day: staff movements, vault timings, camera placements, and which doors were left unlocked too often. He told them where the keys were kept. Which receptionist was careless. What? The alarm technician didn't show up. But there was one problem. While Buckley had access to the side doors of the bank and even had keys to the building itself, he didn't have direct access to the vault. That was the challenge. The vault was guarded by a gate, then a thick steel door, the kind of door that took two separate combinations to open. One known only to the bank manager. The other is known only to the chief cashier. And neither man knew the other's code. The gang needed two things: keys to the vault gate, and a way to crack the vault door itself. Minchington began working on the vault strategy. But Buckley had a role to play too. He turned his charm on the receptionist, the one who held the keys to the vault gate. During a casual conversation, Buckley fumbled accidentally, knocking the keys to the ground. As he bent down to pick them up, his hand disappeared under the desk. Inside his palm was a tin containing plasticine. He pressed each key into it, one at a time, then handed them back with a smile. She never noticed. That day, the gang got everything they needed to make copies of the vault gate keys. And with Minchington's skill, They believed they could crack the vault door once inside. Everything was finally in motion. What they didn't know, what none of them could have predicted, was that someone in the underworld had already whispered to the police. Scotland Yard's intelligence branch, C11, was listening, watching, waiting. With the impressions of the vault gate keys secured, Minchington began crafting exact replicas. In the quiet shadows of a workshop, metal was shaped and filed to precision. One slip, and it wouldn't fit. But Minchington was no amateur. When he finished, the copies were flawless. Meanwhile, Buckley remained inside the bank as usual, fixing wiring, maintaining alarms, and mapping out security. He was their invisible thread, feeding them everything. The shift schedules, patrol times, and which hours left the building completely silent. Soon, the gang was ready to test access. They waited for nightfall. With Davey Street empty and lights off, Buckley unlocked the side entrance and let himself in. Step by step, they moved past the lobby, through security doors, and approached the vault gate. The copied keys turned smoothly. The gate creaked open. Then came the vault door. It loomed large, cold, and silent. 2 dials.
No combinations.
No access. The moment of truth was still beyond reach. While the gang prepared for their heist, C11, Scotland Yard's covert intelligence unit, was quietly watching from a distance. An informant had tipped them off. Something big was coming. But they didn't know what. Or where. Surveillance teams began following Minchington. They watched his movements, logged his meetings, tracked him to a cafe in Cannon Street, 3 miles from Davies Street. There, they spotted him in deep conversation with Buckley and O'Loughlin. The location was telling, right behind the Bank of America's Cannon Street branch. Investigators made a logical conclusion. The Cannon Street branch must be the target. They didn't know the real heist would happen elsewhere. They were close, but not close enough. It was time. On Friday, October 25, 1974, at precisely 6 p.m., the Bank of America closed for the weekend. Lights dimmed. Alarms set. Staff locked the vault and walked away. That night, the gang returned. Dressed in black, tools in hand, they entered the building with Buckley's key. No resistance.
No witnesses.
Inside the vault room, Minchington placed electromagnetic presses on the lock dials. The plan was simple but bold: drill into both locks, feel the mechanism with fine metal probes, and disengage the system manually. But the vault door wasn't giving in. 7 inches of steel. Decades of engineering. And now, under the gang's drills, nothing but heat and resistance. The drill bits began to burn. The steel resisted with brutal stubbornness. They tried to cool the bit with Coca-Cola, pouring the soda over the smoking metal. A desperate move. One by one, the drill bits snapped. Frustration turned to panic. Time was running out. They knew that if they stayed longer, someone might come. The vault remained sealed. Hours passed, and nothing had been achieved. No alarms were triggered, but no treasure was taken either. With tempers flaring, they called it. The job was off. They vanished into the night, leaving behind cans of Coke, shattered drill bits, and a crime scene that smelled of sweat and failure. On Monday morning, October 28th, bank staff opened the building to a scene of confusion. A breached side door.
A scorched vault exterior.
A sticky mess of spilled soda and twisted metal fragments littering the floor. But nothing had been taken. The vault hadn't been opened. No damage to deposit boxes. No missing assets. The police responded and labeled it an attempted burglary, a clumsy, failed attempt that barely warranted escalation. No alarms had gone off. No CCTV footage was usable. And crucially, no fingerprints had been found. C11 never got the report. The incident was filed away quietly, just another break-in attempt in a city full of them. No one saw it for what it really was. A rehearsal. A near miss. A warning that Britain's biggest bank heist had almost begun, and no one had noticed. The robbers had failed. But they weren't finished. Despite the failure of their first attempt, Stuart Buckley returned to work at the Bank of America without suspicion. No one questioned him. No one raised an eyebrow. The attempted break-in had been so clumsily dismissed, not even internal security had looked his way. It was as if nothing had happened. But Buckley couldn't shake the feeling that they had been close, so close to pulling it off. The frustration of that night lingered in his mind as he resumed his daily repairs and installations. Then, fate gave him a second chance. One afternoon, Buckley was called to install electrical wiring above the bank's ceiling panels, right above the vault. It was routine work. Wires, ducts, nothing unusual. But as he moved through the claustrophobic crawlspace of the false ceiling, something slipped. A screwdriver dropped from his tool belt. It fell straight through a panel crack and disappeared. Cursing under his breath, Buckley carefully peered through the small opening. What he saw below stopped him cold. Directly beneath him stood the bank manager and the chief cashier, preparing to open the vault. From his hidden position just above the ceiling tiles, Buckley had a perfect view of both men as they input their respective combinations, one after the other. 2 dials. 2 sets of numbers. 1 vault. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He simply watched, silently memorizing the order in which they turned the dials. He even used a magnifying lens, likely from an old camera or pocket kit, to study their movements in detail. They had no idea he was there, just 3 feet above their heads. As the vault door slowly opened, Buckley carefully jotted down the full combination. Then he waited, patiently, pressed against warm pipes and stale air, for hours. When the bank finally closed for the day, he climbed back down, walked out the front door with his key, and disappeared into the night. This time, he had everything. When Buckley told Frank Maple what he'd witnessed, it was like handing over the Holy Grail. This wasn't just inside access anymore, this was a blueprint to the vault. Most criminal gangs would have walked away after a failed job. Not this one. Now they had the vault combination, the building keys, and precise knowledge of staff schedules. The plan was redrawn. With new confidence, the gang gathered their tools again. They would no longer waste time with drills and electromagnetic presses. There would be no second guessing, no overheating steel, no soda bottle desperation. Buckley had seen the codes. Buckley had written them down. Now, the only thing standing between them and the contents of hundreds of deposit boxes was time. They quietly reassembled the crew. Fresh weapons were sourced. More lookouts were recruited. And each member of the team was briefed, down to the minute, on when to enter and when to exit. They had studied the bank's routines for months. Every weakness was now mapped out. They knew exactly when the computer room would be active. They knew which doors had blind spots. They knew when the alarms were set, and more importantly, how to disable them. This time, they wouldn't fail. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about redemption. And they were ready to pull off what would become Britain's biggest bank heist, quietly, surgically, and with one goal in mind. Get in. Get the treasure. Get out. It was Thursday, April 24, 1975, and the Bank of America's Davies Street branch closed at precisely 6:05 p.m. The last of the employees filed out. The vault was locked. The building fell silent. 30 minutes later, 8 men arrived, dressed sharply in tailored suits, briefcases in hand. On the streets of Mayfair, they looked like city executives finishing a long day at the office. But they weren't bankers. They were thieves. This time, they didn't need to force a door or disable an alarm. Buckley's key turned smoothly in the lock. The men entered like they belonged there. Inside, the plan unfolded with military precision. The crew had a narrow window, 2 to 2.5 hours before the first security patrol would arrive. Every second mattered. Each member had a role. Some would crack and empty deposit boxes. Others stood guard as lookouts. 2 positioned themselves closest to the computer room, where late working staff could present a problem. This time, there would be no mistakes. Buckley's combination codes worked like a charm. 1 dial, then the other. Click. The massive steel vault door swung open with a satisfying grind. No heat.
No drills. No struggle.
Just knowledge. Inside were hundreds of safety deposit boxes, stacked and waiting. The men used tools to cane the boxes, pry them open with brute force and leverage. They weren't subtle. They didn't need to be. By the time the job was over, they had successfully opened 79 boxes, each packed with cash, jewels, documents, and high-value personal effects. The room sparkled with gold and diamonds. The hall was immense. But in the shadows, a new threat was beginning to emerge. As the vault was being emptied, two of the gang members kept watch near the computer room, located dangerously close to the action. The gang had assumed it would be empty. It wasn't. A bank staff member stepped out to stretch his legs and spotted movement where there should have been none. One of the lookouts grabbed him immediately. They had a decision to make. Let him go and risk the alarm, or escalate the situation. They chose escalation. The man was subdued, bound and gagged. But the problem didn't end there. There were two more staff still inside the computer room. To avoid exposure, the gang captured them too. No one was harmed, but the moment their captives were secured, everything changed. It was no longer just burglary. It was armed robbery with hostages. The gang moved quickly. They pulled on balaclavas, concealed their faces, and continued the operation. They'd come this far. There was no turning back now. The bags were full, millions in cash, rare gems, gold watches, and foreign currencies. But the gang left even more behind. They didn't have time to clear everything. Still, what they did take was historic. Before the guards arrived, the 8 men vanished back into the Mayfair night, leaving 3 terrified employees tied up on the floor of the vault's corridor. By the time the security guard arrived and raised the alarm, the robbers were long gone. In total, they had taken £8 million, an astonishing figure for the time. At a prearranged flat, the gang split the loot. Arguments erupted over who would get what. Some wanted jewels. Others preferred clean cash. Coulson, ever the smooth operator, offered money in exchange for the better jewelry, angling for long-term profit. The split was tense. Emotions ran high. But in the end, everyone walked away with a bag of wealth, and a secret to keep. Back at the bank, investigators realized quickly this wasn't a simple job. It was precise, calculated, and clearly guided by someone on the inside. 3 workers had been taken hostage, bound, gagged, left behind like a message. The crime had shifted in nature. It was now robbery with force, a crime that carried the maximum sentence of life imprisonment. And still, no one knew who had done it. For now, the gang had won. They had executed one of the boldest and cleanest heists in British history. But victory always comes at a cost. The silence was broken when a security guard unlocked the bank doors the following morning. Everything seemed normal, until he reached the vault corridor. 3 staff members lay bound and gagged on the floor, their eyes wide with fear. The vault door stood open, surrounded by splintered boxes and scattered paperwork. The air was heavy with dust and disbelief. He raised the alarm. Within hours, the news exploded across London. £8 million had vanished. The Bank of America, violated. 3 employees, held hostage. Reporters flooded the streets. Headlines screamed of a sophisticated criminal operation, daring enough to infiltrate one of the world's most secure financial institutions. It was more than a heist. It was a humiliation. Police quickly identified that the robbers had not just stolen money, but had done so without leaving a single clue behind.
No fingerprints.
No forced entry.
No alarms.
The flying squad was called in, and the hunt began. At Scotland Yard, the pressure was immediate. Public outrage was growing, and the Metropolitan Police demanded swift answers. The flying squad, London's elite robbery unit, was assigned to lead the case. Headed by Detective Chief Superintendent Jack Slipper, a legendary figure known as Slipper of the Yard, the team knew this was more than just another bank job. Slipper reviewed the crime scene in detail. The vault had been opened, not forced. The alarm was intentionally disabled. The operation was silent, professional, and cold. At first, investigators were in the dark, until Slipper approached C11, the intelligence unit. That's when the pieces began to fall into place. C11 shared their surveillance reports. They had observed known criminals Leonard Minchington, Jimmy O'Loughlin, and an unnamed associate, meeting frequently in cafes near Cannon Street. They had assumed the Cannon Street branch was the target. They had been wrong. But now, with Davies Street identified as the actual scene of the crime, and with the same suspects spotted just days earlier, everything came into sharp focus. Slipper now had names, faces, and addresses. The flying squad immediately moved to surveillance and arrest. The hunt was on. The first to fall was Jimmy O'Loughlin. He was spotted shopping at Harrods, casually purchasing expensive suitcases. When officers stopped him, they found the cases stuffed with cash and jewelry, undeniable evidence from the heist. Soon after, Stuart Buckley was arrested. At first, he denied everything. But when detectives placed O'Loughlin's loot in front of him, showing the sheer size of the haul, Buckley saw the truth. He hadn't gotten a fair share. He had been used. Angry. Cornered. Bitter. Buckley broke. He revealed everything, from how he got the job at the bank to how he discovered the vault combination. He described waiting 17 hours in the ceiling, watching the codes being entered, eating sandwiches, and urinating into a bottle. Also, he could give his crew the exact numbers. He told police where his cut was hidden, buried in a plastic pipe in the countryside. For the detectives, this was gold. Buckley became the first major supergrass in British legal history, a criminal-turned-informant who agreed to testify in court in exchange for protection and a reduced sentence. The fallout was massive. More arrests followed. Leonard Minchington. Billy Gear, caught because of a parking ticket near the bank on the day of the heist. Even Guy's wife was briefly detained, though later released when it was proven she played no role. But two names were still missing from the arrest list. Frank Maple, the mastermind, had vanished, rumored to be hiding in Spain. And Peter Coulson, the lucky thief, had disappeared without a trace. The flying squad had solved the heist. They had cracked open Britain's most daring robbery. But a fortune remained missing, £7.5 million, unaccounted for. And the two men who mattered most were still out there. Stuart Buckley sat across from investigators at West End Central Police Station, no longer just an informant, now the linchpin of the entire investigation. At first, he gave them names, then details, then the full timeline. He described how he climbed into the false ceiling above the vault, how he lay still for 17 hours, sandwiched between metal pipes and warm ducts. He had prepared sandwiches, a flashlight, and a bottle to relieve himself. He had waited all night, silent and still, until the bank manager and chief cashier entered below. Then, from his secret perch, he had watched them dial in the two separate combinations. Slowly, carefully, and as they turned the locks, Buckley memorized every move. When the vault opened, he knew the job was possible. The codes were his. The bank was theirs. He admitted everything, how he handed over the codes, how the gang prepared, and how they executed the robbery. He even named who took what in the split. Detectives quickly realized what they had in Buckley wasn't just a witness. He was the gateway to unraveling the entire crew. Under pressure from the public and Scotland Yard, the prosecution made a controversial decision. Stuart Buckley would become a supergrass, the first major one in British legal history. In return for full cooperation, including court testimony, Buckley would receive a reduced sentence and protection while in custody. But the price of that cooperation was steep. In the criminal underworld, supergrasses were traitors, snitches, marked men. To testify against your own crew meant a lifetime of fear, retaliation, and isolation. The police knew that too. Buckley was moved to a secure unit, kept away from other inmates, and heavily guarded. Armed officers were assigned to escort him during any movement, to court, to interviews, even for fresh air. The word spread fast. Buckley had flipped. And now, he was a target. On one occasion, while being taken to lunch in Kensington by an armed officer, Buckley froze at the sight of a man entering the restaurant. He paled. His voice trembled. "I swear that looked like Peter Coulson," he whispered. It wasn't Coulson, but the fear was real. Buckley would never be safe again. To the police, he was a breakthrough. To the underworld, he was a dead man walking. As Buckley's cooperation continued, the flying squad used his information to chase down the rest of the gang. Arrests mounted. Evidence piled up. But the threat against Buckley only grew. He became a symbol, not just of betrayal, but of a changing era in British law enforcement. The supergrass system, though effective, was dangerous. It introduced a new method of cracking organized crime, but it also created a new class of hunted men. In custody, Buckley was escorted by multiple officers. Every movement was tracked. Every door he passed through was watched. The police promised protection, but even they knew that inside a cell or out on the street, anything could happen. He had sold out the crew. He had brought down one of the biggest bank robberies in UK history. And now, he would never live a normal life again. With Stuart Buckley's full confession, the flying squad had everything they needed: names, timelines, roles, and even hiding spots. The next man arrested was Leonard Minchington, the gang's expert safecracker. But Minchington wasn't like Buckley. When they brought him in, he refused to speak.
No bargaining. No panic.
He sat quietly through questioning, deep in thought, unmoved. Detective Chief Superintendent Jack Slipper believed he was close to cracking him, but Minchington stayed silent, resolute, calm, and cold. He gave nothing. Meanwhile, another lead opened a new door. A man named Billy Gear, connected to the gang, had been spotted at the scene on the night of the robbery. His mistake? Something seemingly small, a parking ticket. Gear had taken his children to the dentist that day. Running late, he parked illegally close to the Bank of America and rushed to the appointment. That mistake would cost him everything. Detectives traced the citation to his vehicle, and from there, to his home. He was arrested, along with his wife. Fearing for her, Gear cracked. He confessed to his part in the heist and returned his share of the stolen goods on one condition: his wife would be released. She had played no role and he wanted her free. The deal was struck. One more piece of the puzzle locked into place. But two critical pieces remained missing. The man who masterminded it all, Frank Maple, and the elusive thief with no record, Peter Coulson. By the time the arrests began, Frank Maple had already vanished. Investigators believed he had slipped quietly across the border and fled to Spain, possibly using false documents and a clean passport. Once out, he disappeared into the sun-drenched coastlines of the Costa del Sol, a haven for British fugitives at the time. As for Peter Coulson, the man with the cleanest hands and the most polished reputation, he vanished without a trace. Coulson was the hardest to pin down.
No convictions. No fingerprints.
No visible trail. He wasn't just lucky. He was smart. While the others had lived loudly, Coulson had lived quietly, in shadows, moving in and out of circles, always careful never to leave a footprint. With the pressure mounting and the media storm growing by the day, the flying squad intensified their efforts to locate Coulson, tracking any associates, friends, or contacts he might lean on for help. But for now, both men were ghosts. And the trail, at least temporarily, had gone cold. Despite the lack of a criminal record, Peter Coulson had become one of the most wanted men in Britain. The flying squad believed that if they didn't find him soon, he'd vanish for good. But then a lead surfaced, from a grass. The tip-off revealed Coulson had been calling two girlfriends in North London regularly, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. But he wasn't using a home phone. He was using a public telephone booth somewhere near Knightsbridge. The pattern was tight. All calls were made between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. The flying squad didn't waste time. They deployed officers to cover over 20 phone kiosks in the area, taking shifts, watching for anyone matching Coulson's description. Days passed. Nothing. More days passed. Still nothing. Then, on the 12th day, 2 officers, Reg Leonard and his colleague, were driving back to the station when something caught Reg's eye. A kiosk near Harrods. One he hadn't remembered checking. Inside it, a man was making a call. As they approached, adrenaline kicked in. The tip had warned that Coulson wouldn't go down easily. He might be armed. He might run. Worst case, he might shoot. They didn't hesitate. Leonard's partner ripped the door open, and Leonard lunged. He wrapped his arm around Coulson's neck, forced him to the ground, pulled out his revolver, and pressed it against his head. "Peter Coulson, you're nicked." The ghost was caught. The lucky thief's luck had just run out. As the courts began to assemble the case, Jimmy O'Loughlin was one of the prime defendants, caught, charged, and awaiting trial. At Marlborough Street Magistrates Court, O'Loughlin was handed his legal documents by his solicitor. After speaking briefly with his barrister, he asked for a quick stop at the toilet before being escorted to the transport van. What happened next was breathtakingly bold. Instead of returning to the waiting police officers, O'Loughlin confidently walked in the opposite direction, away from the building. No one stopped him. He blended into the street with a shocking level of calm. Within minutes, he had escaped from police custody in broad daylight. News spread like wildfire. The press erupted. Rumors flew. Had he bribed someone? Had it been planned? How could he have just walked out? Within hours, the embarrassment hit the flying squad hard. Jack Slipper was furious. He'd built the case piece by piece, and now, one of the gang's key figures had slipped away under their watch. And Slipper wasn't about to let that stand. Slipper focused his attention on Janet Allen, O'Loughlin's girlfriend. She lived in South London, smart, loyal, and guarded. But Slipper knew her type. He sensed something was off. He and Detective Chief Inspector Mallory visited her flat and began pressing her. She denied knowing where O'Loughlin was. Calm, composed. But Slipper could tell she was covering for him. "You need to convince him to turn himself in," he said firmly. "This doesn't end well otherwise." Finally, she let something slip. "I'll probably be able to speak to him before the weekend." That was all he needed. The next day, Slipper returned, with a search warrant. His team tore through the flat, checking every inch. Room after room, nothing. Then, under the staircase, one officer paused. Something smelled off. They dug through piles of rubbish and bags, and behind the clutter, wedged in the dark, Jimmy O'Loughlin. Silent, cornered, caught. They dragged him out, humiliated and defeated. The escape had ended. The manhunt was over. The gang was finally complete, every man accounted for. On November 16, 1976, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, family members, detectives, and legal teams filled every bench. The tension was thick. The verdicts were inevitable. One by one, the men behind Britain's most audacious bank heist were sentenced. Jimmy O'Loughlin, the operational commander, received 17 years. Leonard Minchington, the vault expert and safecracker, was handed a crushing 23 years, the harshest sentence of the group. Peter Coulson, the elusive lucky thief, received 21 years behind bars. As the main gang members were led away in cuffs, some sneered. Some smirked. Others stared ahead, unblinking, refusing to give the cameras or the public the satisfaction of emotion. They had pulled off a heist that would be studied for decades. And now, they would pay for it. But one name was conspicuously absent from the dock: Stuart Buckley. Tried separately due to his supergrass status, Buckley received a significantly reduced sentence, just 5 years. In return for betraying the crew, he had walked away with his life, and perhaps, one day, a second chance. In the months that followed, detectives worked to trace the stolen goods, millions in jewelry, foreign currency, and valuables looted from 79 deposit boxes. They came up largely empty. Only a small fraction of the total haul was ever recovered, about £500,000. A staggering £7.5 million had vanished into the criminal underground. Some of it may have been melted down. Some laundered through foreign accounts. Some quietly sold in private deals. And some, perhaps, buried deep, waiting in secret, untouched, and forgotten. No one knew. And no one ever would. The Mayfair bank robbery didn't just break records, it changed history. It exposed the vulnerabilities of elite financial institutions. It introduced the era of the supergrass, a tactic now woven into the fabric of British law enforcement. And it reminded a nation that crime, even when sophisticated and silent, still leaves scars. For the men who pulled it off, the score had been massive. The execution, near perfect. But greed always asks for more. They had taken £8 million. But they had lost everything else: freedom, trust, and anonymity. Frank Maple, the mastermind, was never caught. To this day, he remains a phantom, his name whispered only in speculation, his fate unknown. Stuart Buckley, the man who started it all, faded into obscurity after prison. his life forever marked by betrayal, risk, and regret. And the question that lingers in every mind: where did the money go? A story of opportunity, a lesson in precision, and a reminder. Sometimes the biggest score is the one that never truly gets away. If you found this heist as jaw-dropping as we did, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we've got more real-life crime stories that are just as unbelievable. Want to know where the £7.5 million might be hidden? Or how Britain's most wanted man vanished without a trace? Let us know in the comments what theory you believe, and until next time, stay alert, stay sharp, and never underestimate the power of an inside man.